I've made several videos discussing single winner voting systems and which would be the best to use for single seat constituencies in general elections. But then we need to ask whether simply putting together the results of 650, in the case of the UK, distinct elections is a good way to form a national parliament. This is irrespective of which single winner method used, whether first past the post, alternative vote, score voting, approval voting or anything else. The most obvious alternative to this is proportional representation. So which is the better and fairer system? If the political views of the country were fairly homogeneous and each region essentially the same politically, then under our current system of 650 separate first past the post elections, we'd end up with a landslide at every election, because pretty much every constituency would return the same result. Whereas if support was much more concentrated into pockets, then we'd end up with something like proportional representation. So the makeup of the national parliament seems to be highly dependent not just on the political views of the electorate, but on the geographical distribution of these views. The Scottish National Party won 56 seats at the general election in 2015. That's 8.6% of the seats, with 4.7% of the vote. Even in Scotland alone, they won about 95% of the seats, with 50% of the vote. UKIP, on the other hand, won just one seat, or 0.015% of the seats, with 12.7% of the vote. In the 1983 general election, Labour won 27.6% of the vote nationally, and the SDP Liberal Alliance won 25.4%. Not much in it. But Labour won 209 seats, whereas the SDP Liberal Alliance won just 23. None of this seems that fair on the surface. Well, one response that people give to this is that each constituency chooses its own representative, and if you don't get enough support in your constituency, you don't deserve to be elected. That's all very well and good if each MP is completely separate from the others, and a constituency's MP is just there to do work in their constituency. But they're not. MPs make up the national parliament, hence the name Member of Parliament, and the national parliament should represent the people of the country on more than just a crude geographical basis. We have a problem that our general elections are trying to achieve two things: elect representatives to geographical areas and also elect a national parliament. And a system that works well for one of these doesn't necessarily work well for the other. Our current system is entirely based around electing representatives to geographical areas, with the makeup of our national parliament purely a byproduct of that. Why should supporters of UKIP not get their fair share of representation just because they happen to be spread out over the country rather than focused into small areas? And why should the Scottish National Party get more representation because their support is in one small area? When it comes to passing national legislation, the geographical locations of MP support is not really relevant. So yes, proportional representation is fairer and more democratic than forming the national parliament from 650 standalone elections. But there are arguments that people use in favour of the current system. The first is that it makes single-party majority governments more likely, and that this is a good thing. We don't end up with coalitions, and if we don't like a government, we can cleanly vote them out. There does seem to be a certain assumption that coalitions are a bad thing, partly because of the backroom deals, and that parties can then pick and choose the parts of their manifesto that they want to keep. But if we had proportional representation, and coalition governments were the norm, then parties would have to be clear beforehand what parts of their manifesto they would be flexible on, under what circumstances. It was only because the hung parliament in the UK in 2010 was a rare event that politicians weren't prepared for it properly, a hung parliament being where no single party wins a majority of the seats. And about voting out governments. Our current Conservative majority government got in with 36.8% of the national vote. So yes, we could vote out our government if over 63% of the population wanted to do so. But what kind of democracy is it if over 63% of the voting population is required to vote against a government for it to be ousted? Not a very good one. If over 50% vote against a party, they should not be able to form a majority government. That's democracy. It also ties in neatly with the idea of proportional representation. Also, proportional representation isn't the step into the complete unknown that some people think it is. Many other countries, particularly in Europe, have proportional representation and don't end up with single-party majority governments, and the sky hasn't exactly fallen in on those countries. If we're talking economics, Germany is generally accepted as having a stronger economy than the UK, and they have proportional representation in Germany. And although the UK is often said to have the 5th largest economy in the world, it also has a large population. When we look at gross domestic product per person, it is generally ranked 20-something, behind several countries that have proportional representation. But there are several measures of the success of a country, including its democratic credentials. For example, in the 2015 Democracy Ranking List, all of the top 10 countries use proportional representation for their parliamentary elections. In the 2015 Democracy Index, 8 of the top 10 do. Of those that don't, Canada in 7th place is possibly going to adopt it soon, and Australia in 9th place does actually use proportional representation for its upper house, the equivalent of the UK's House of Lords. The Human Development Index measures countries on life expectancy, education and income, and in its latest list, 7 of the top 10 use proportional representation for their parliament. 2 of the top 10 are Australia and Canada, which I've already mentioned, and the other is America in 8th place, which does not use proportional representation. None of these ranking lists prove that proportional representation is the best way to form a parliament, but the point is that there appears to be no evidence that it causes any major problems for countries' progress, whether democratic progress, economic progress, or anything else. Most of the arguments against it are just scaremongering. So the point here is that yes, single-party majority governments are less likely under proportional representation, but there doesn't appear to be much evidence that it actually matters. And even if single-party majority governments are something we want to hold on to, we can do a lot better than 650 separate first-past-the-post elections anyway. You could actually design a system where it was guaranteed. In the 2010 general election in the UK, we had a hung parliament, and this came very close to happening again at the very next election in 2015. This is not a coincidence. Decades ago, the vast majority of people voted for the Conservatives or Labour, so one or the other was virtually guaranteed a majority. But nowadays, far more people vote for other parties, and single-party majority governments are getting less likely with every election. The way things are going, we will end up with a lot more hung parliaments. But given that the only supposed saving grace of our current system is that we get single-party majority governments, and it's not actually very good at that, it's surely time to get rid of it. So, proportional representation then. Case closed. We can all go home. Well, it's not quite as simple as that. There are many sorts of proportional representation, some of which are not very democratic themselves. This is often wrongly used against proportional representation as a whole. To ensure that each party gets its proportional share, under some systems voters have to vote for parties rather than individual candidates. At least our current system of having 650 individual election winners means that we are voting for individual candidates rather than party brands. Also, if we vote for parties, where would that leave independent candidates? But actually, proportional representation doesn't need to refer to parties in any way. For example, the single transferable vote system treats candidates individually, but would still give party proportionality if voters had a party that they were all loyal to. Some people find this confusing. When people talk about proportional representation, they normally talk about parties getting seats in proportion to the number of votes they get. So if we can have proportional representation without parties, how are we actually defining it? Well, it's actually quite simple. With party proportionality, if a party gets twice as many votes as another party, they get twice as many seats. So the representation per voter is the same. We can say that MPs each have one unit of representation that is equally split among their voters. And if an independent candidate is elected, then their representation is split equally among their supporters in the same way as a party candidate. So we can define proportional representation as follows. Each voter, as close as possible, should end up with the same amount of representation, equal to the total number of candidates divided by the total number of voters. That's what we need to aim for, and I will go into how this works with a variety of systems in a future video. But that is all for now. Thank you for watching my video. If you enjoyed it, you can subscribe to my channel. Even better, you can buy my book, Stuff and Consciousness, Connecting Matter and Mind, by me, Toby Pereira. It's all about how your seemingly non-physical thoughts and feelings can come from your physical brain. It's available in paperback and also on Kindle. Links are available in the video description below, or you can visit my website at www.tobypereira.co.uk. Thank you.